and welcome to the podcast of Loughborough University's Institute of Advanced Studies, a podcast where our international fellows discuss the most pressing issues of today that we're all facing and share their exciting research ideas. We hope you enjoyed today's talk. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this. This will be different than the seminar that we had before. Actually, I also want to thank Yaji because you asked me to think with you about a topic that might be interesting and also useful for the PGR community here and elsewhere also, because there are a few people also joining on Zoom. And the thing I was thinking how to set up, well, two things. I think first I will just tell you. Actually, I just go through my CV with you. That's pretty much what I'm going to do, to tell you what kind of jobs I did and how I ended up there. So there's no necessarily like a roadmap to you in terms of, well, if you do this, then you get a job in academia, because it's so broad. Also, this is quite specific, of course, to the Netherlands. And then in the end, I think there are 5 things that I just wanted, we already discussed a few, but 5 things that I wanted to mention that I think helped or sort of that shaped my academic career in a way. And then I would like to ask you to ask questions as we go. So not that I don't want to talk for 20, 30 minutes or whatever. So if you have any questions based on what you already see on the slides, just ask them. So we can just make this a little bit more interactive, because I've been talking for too long in the previous talk. What you see here, oh, and if there are people online that have questions, I think Karen maybe already put something in the chat or not. Yeah, so if there are questions from the online people, please feel free to ask. First of all, what you see here is the Media Studies Department of the University of Amsterdam. This is my home, my academic home, and it has been for a very long time. And I think that is something that is quite, if you think about what is sort of typical about my CV, is actually that it's very focused on this particular place. And that's different from some other people who did their undergrad, for instance, in the Netherlands and then came to Loughborough. And I think a lot of you are international PhDs, meaning that you didn't do everything at the same place, and I did. And that is also something that is quite different from, for instance, let's say a US context where you aren't really allowed to do that. So as I said, like the things that I'm going to say about my specific academic career are typical of the place where I did it. And so I hope you can take some things from that, at least. But in any case, otherwise you have like a narrative CV. Yeah, and of course I will also leave questions, like time for a actual Q&A at the end, but I think it makes more sense if there's anything on the slides that you want to ask about, then ask it directly. Okay. Let me check. First of all, this is it. This is this is my academic career on one slide. It starts here. It starts with the BA, I would say. So I did the BA Media and Culture. Then I did a research master, Media Studies. Then I became a lecturer in television and cross-media culture. Then I did the PhD. So I was a lecturer, then I became a PhD. Then I became a lecturer again, mostly because I ran out of my funding for the PhD and I needed money. And then I applied for a postdoctoral scholarship, got that. And then after I can explain it later. Also during the postdoctoral scholarship, I applied for an assistant professorship, and then I got that, and that's where I am at the moment. And no, I'll explain as we go. But for instance, even like an assistant professorship, what it looks like in the Netherlands, for instance, is different from the US. And one of the things I think you also need to consider for yourself is where you see yourself in the future. I think that's one thing, because academia works differently, I would say, in different contexts. And you have a say in that to a certain extent. You can sort of push it to a certain extent, but also a lot has to do with where there are actually jobs, for instance. And also this is very much, I'm aiming this very much as someone who stayed in academia also. And of course, there are a lot of PhDs who don't stay in academia but this will mainly be aimed for people who, hey, come in, who want to stay in academia because that is what I did. And I enjoy it. So that's fine. Okay, first. BA and master, I did both at the University of Amsterdam. So what this is the BA is a BA. It's the same here, don't need to explain that. But during the BA, I pretty much found out that I really like doing research. And that I really like doing memory studies, which I talked about previously. So I did the research master in media studies, which is focused on research and doing research with the, I wouldn't say that you're necessarily more now, I would say, than maybe in the past, but to a certain extent, you're trained to, or it is aimed towards people who want to do a PhD after the research master, but then getting the PhD is the difficulty. So during the research master, I already want to do a PhD. Yeah, I think I pretty much wanted to do a PhD yet, but as I'll explain in a second, that's not easy to get. And then during that year, I think a lot of teaching opportunities opened up, as in sort of loose courses opened up, and then it ended up being more or less a let's say substantial teaching contract. So that's how that came to be. And the thing with that is that specifically, I don't know how this works elsewhere, but at the media studies department, a lot of people apply for and get grants. And so for instance, it doesn't really apply to me, but in the case, I would have actually been teaching now because there's now a semester going on also in Amsterdam and I'm now in Loughborough. So that would mean if I could got a grant here, someone else needed to fill in my teaching in Amsterdam. And a lot of my colleagues are very successful in getting grants. I'll come to that in a second also. And so that happened, I think, at that time also, and because of that, spaces opened up for teaching. And then during that entire year, I was able to do the teaching, but it was also a period in which I was very much advised and pushed to do a PhD. And the thing is, that works differently everywhere you are. Actually, I don't know how you got your PhD. I don't know how that works here. We might need to discuss that. Hey, come in. But how that works in the Netherlands is pretty much that, especially at that time, is that the department itself does not have PhD positions. So there is no PhD position to apply for at the Department of Media Studies. And so you have pretty much two options. This fluctuates how this works, but pretty much there are two options in the Netherlands to do a PhD. One is you wait until a principal investigator gets an external research grant of $1 million or $2 million, and then there are 2 or 3 PhD positions in that project, and then you apply to that. That's, I think, the most common way. The other way is to apply to external research funding, and then you can start a PhD project. This is highly competitive. I'll explain also in a second how that works, but in my case, that was successful. And then this happened. So I applied to what you call the MAO PhD in Humanities grant, which is an individual project that you write, and then you have 2 supervisors. They help you in the application to a certain extent to develop your idea, and then from the University of Amsterdam specifically, there's a research team that might help you do mock interviews because you need to do an interview. Should I go into that one? Actually, no, because you already PhD. But this is also a whole process. It takes months, and then you need to write a research proposal. You need to do an interview with an external committee, etc., etc. But then you can start your PhD. But the thing was, again, I did it at the Department of Media Studies, University of Amsterdam. So as you can see by now, the thread in my CV was Amsterdam, 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 which is fine because it's a very good university. Specifically, the Media Studies department is very good. So that was pretty much fine, but I also wanted to have, let's say, a little bit of diversity. It doesn't hurt anyone in that sense. So what I did there is I applied to other let's say, affiliations, positions, and funding also. So this is actually what we just talked about. The Indonesian BAs that were from Nottingham, they also knew of KITLV, which is the Royal Netherlands Institute of Southeast Asian and Caribbean Studies, because what I figured is, okay, my expertise lies in media studies, but my topic is also in Indonesia. So I try to go to the KITLV in Leiden because they have a lot of expertise on Indonesia. So to gain sort of that expertise there. And then I also applied to another grant, which brought me to the Asia Institute in Melbourne, for the same reason, because there again, there are a lot of people working on Indonesia have that expertise, but they also have that combination of Asia or specifically Indonesia and media, and what I was searching for. And then finally, I also applied for another grant, and with which I was able to go to Berkeley. And so, yeah, I'll get into this also in a second, but this was during the PhD. Do I want to say there? Here I would say luck is also a bit on your side. Well, it's double. I think it comes together in the end. And then what? PhD, as I said, in the Netherlands, the funding is for a certain period of time. Due to personal circumstances, I was unable to completely finalize the PhD in the allotted time, and so I needed to apply for a job because otherwise I couldn't pay my rent. And then what I did was the only place that I applied to at that time. I think I'm skipping here also actually during my PhD, I also taught. I taught at the media studies department, but I also taught in Leiden University, because of that also comes back in the end, but because of people that I had connected with, they had also an opening for a teaching position in Leiden for a course and as a coordinator for a lecture series. And then they asked me there. So during this period, I also taught in Leiden and Amsterdam. And then after the PhD, or actually when the contract ended, I needed to apply, and I applied for a job opening that opened up in Amsterdam again at the media studies department. And so I got that, which is here. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Oh, yeah.
Did you do your PhD in full-time or part-time?
It was 80% time. But because I taught 20% next to it, it was sort of, I was doing it full time. That was partly why it took longer. But this was a weird construction. Normally it's either I think normally it's full time in general, but in the year that I applied to this grant, they had an 80% rule. I can't explain anymore why, but so that was a bit difficult. But I actually added 20% in teaching to that, so I had a full-time contract. But this took me years, just to know. I mean, I didn't do this in 3. Was it someone here, or was it in Oxford? The other day I was in Oxford. I think someone told me that their PhD, which is a DPhil, they got 3 years for doing that. And I said that is pretty much impossible to do that for good research in 3 years. Took me longer, but also, as I said, circumstances. But I applied for lecture in film studies, and I got that. And this is a regular job opening. So this was what you see online. So in the Netherlands specifically, there's a website, Academic Transfer, where they publish all the jobs in the Netherlands on, and this was a job opening there. This was a lecturer in film studies. This was not a full-time job. This was, I can remember, I'm pretty sure it was 0.7, so 17% contract of a full-time equivalent contract, which was quite regular in the Netherlands, now changed to 80%. And I think during this time also it was increased to 80%. But what you see here is this is you're only doing teaching. So you do not get paid for research. And the same was here when I finalized my MA and I started as a lecturer in television cross media culture. I wrote the application for this PhD position pretty much in my free time because you don't get time for that. So it was, I don't know, weekends, evenings, things like so. Like the horrible stories that you are being told about academia, that was pretty much there. And teaching, I really love teaching, but it takes also a lot of time. I really dislike grading because that also takes a lot of time. But teaching itself is nice. I like that. But this is the problem with the lecturer positions in the Netherlands. Also, sorry, I should say a lecturer position is not the same as a lecturer position here. I think a lecturer here is an equivalent to an assistant professor job. The lecturer is only teaching position. I don't know what's called here. Maybe like a teaching associate or university teacher. Exactly. Okay, so sorry, that's maybe to make that clear also, because that's also different. So this is in terms of getting paid for your work is a teaching position. And then so publications, applications, everything you need to do in your free time. here, finally, you get paid to do the research, of course. But then I was stuck again with the teaching position. Or stuck again, it's a privilege to have the position, but that is pretty much where we are. Oh wait, is this for you?
Yeah, just one.
Sorry. Do they expect applicants to learn second language? This is a good question. Yes, they do, especially with our new government. So the thing is this, I haven't made that clear also, and I don't know, can't remember if I said it before, but I am Dutch. I grew up in the Netherlands, speak Dutch, etc. It's my mother tongue, so I don't have that problem. But the question that's being asked, I don't know if you can read it, is if you are, for instance, coming from the UK, you don't speak Dutch, if you apply to a position, whether or not you need to learn Dutch. That's the question. And well, first of all, it will be specified in the job opening, but secondly, pretty much yes. And I think the timing that you get is, I think it's 2 years, something like that. But I know I have colleagues who are international colleagues who are actively learning Dutch because it's a requirement of their job contract. And especially now, I don't know if we need to go into that, but we have a government that is putting emphasis on Dutch within academia, and it for sure also has to do with this. So a lot of colleagues are now learning Dutch more quickly, I would say, and it's not an easy language to learn as well. But this is a good thing to ask, because in general, when I did my BA, the BA was in Dutch, and later on it became fully in English. So our BA was in English, or is in English, MA is in English, PhD is in English, etc. So that attracts a lot of international colleagues and international students, which is a good thing. But it makes it more difficult if you are coming from abroad. But I would for sure not let that. I mean, if there's a position in the Netherlands that you would really like, and it asks you to learn Dutch in 2 years, I would still apply to that. For sure, I wouldn't deter from that job because of that requirement.
So just to add to that.
Yeah.
Is there like a level of Dutch that you have to
Yeah.
know? Like, is there like grade 1, 2, 3?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have absolutely no clue what it means. Unfortunately, can't help you with that. But it is difficult. I have colleagues who, I mean, the thing is this. You need to understand that if you come to the Netherlands and you have, for instance, let's say an assistant professor job, it might be completely new to you. So it's new how academia works there, which is different from other countries, I would say. Then you need to do the teaching, you need to do the research because you still need to publish, etc. And then you also need to learn an entirely new language. I know that you would do it because you're multilingual, I know. But for the rest of us, it's quite difficult. I would find it extremely difficult to learn that language in 2 years with all the things you need to do. But speaking from my particular department, they are very supportive in this. And they think with you rather than against you. So if it is something, you need to understand that if you have a job opening, you apply to it, you get the job offer, then in general it means that both of you want you to be there. And so in general, I would say that the idea is that the people that you work with are trying to help you also to achieve this. Now I'm also biased. I mean, I'm being recorded, so I wouldn't say any other thing, but I really love my department in Amsterdam also because my colleagues are great. And so it's very supportive. I'll actually come back to that also later on. But academia can be a very toxic environment for sure. And that also has to do with whether or not you want to stay at a certain place, but you don't know that beforehand. But it's particularly in Amsterdam, it's very good. So in my case, what they, I'll come back to the question. What they also do is, for instance, they help you in doing research and gaining and research, etc. No, you need to teach Dutch after 2 years in Dutch.
Wow.
So the idea is that you speak Dutch fluently enough to teach in Dutch. That's the idea. And I mean, as I said, you need to figure out whether or not, or what it says in the particular job opening, because it differs. But also I think in the job opening now, it says what the requirement is. And it's in like B1, A1, I don't know what the levels are, unfortunately. But the idea is that you teach in Dutch. Yeah, for sure. And so because I speak Dutch and English, I now get a lot of the Dutch students also, because we have the BA, for instance, it's an English BA, but we have a Dutch track. So if Dutch students want to do the BA in Dutch, it's possible. And I get a lot of those students because I speak Dutch and many of my colleagues don't. But the idea in the future is that they are integrated into the Dutch track, or if the bachelor is becoming entirely Dutch, which is, I don't know if that's possible, but I mean, there are a lot of things going on in the Netherlands also in terms of politics. But the requirement is with the idea that you speak Dutch after 2 years. Is it realistic? I don't know, but is academia realistic? Also not always, but I'll come back to that. Okay, lecture in film studies. So what did I do? I did this job, then I finished the PhD simultaneously, but then, and I had very supportive, I'll come back to the question also, but I had very supportive supervisors who weren't always happy with me, because one of the things that I did was I did the lecture position, I finished the PhD, but I also applied already for a postdoc. So that had overlap, but I got that one. Wait, is it a new question or are we? Okay. Okay, and so I applied for a postdoc. And the postdoc was again an external grant, because the postdoc, as with the PhD, is pretty much the same in the Netherlands. You either apply for a job that's open because there is a principal investigator who gets money, or you apply for individual fellowships. And there are a few. This was one of them, the Niels Stenson Fellowship. And that was a great one, actually, because that allowed me to go to 2 universities. I had the choice to either stay 1 year at one university or go 6 months to one university and then 6 months to another. And I decided to do the latter. So last year I was first 6 months in Oxford and then 6 months in LA. Also to give you a timeline, actually, because I didn't use years, I realized, is that I defended my PhD last year in March. So that was when so 2023. So 29 March 2023, I defended my PhD, and then the postdoc ran until the end of January 2024, so beginning of this year. But this was also a great opportunity, also in terms of different, if you would say like differences between universities and academia, I can tell you that Oxford and UCLA is also quite different. And then I can't even remember when it was. I think, it was in 2023. It was in 2023 when I defended my PhD, when I also applied for an assistant professorship. And I got that assistant professorship, but because I was doing the postdoc, it was, the starting date was this year. You still following? So this has a lot of overlap. So again, so I defended the PhD, applied for an assistant professorship, got it, but it started in 2024 because I was still doing the postdoc. And then at the beginning of this year, I became an assistant professor. So this was in February 2024. This started there, and this was a job opening. So there was a job opening at our department for what is called, I didn't make this up, but an assistant professor in extended cinema, film heritage and memory. And I'll come back to that because my profile fit this job, but also I wouldn't say 100% because it not always does, but to a very large extent, because I worked on cinema, I worked on heritage issues, cinematic also, and mainly also on memory. So that is also one thing I would say. And that is the career, because that's where I'm now. Any questions up until now? Yeah, I'll come to you in a second, yeah.
Do you ever think of like shifting to other departments or subjects?
Yeah, good question. No. Now, the thing is this, the media studies department fits my research very well. I feel like I fit the department very well. Also, I really like the colleagues, as I said, so it's a good place to be. But in terms of research itself, there I have shifted. So I am still a film studies scholar, but I also sort of was drawn into literature at a certain point. So in Leiden, when I was a lecturer there, I actually worked at the Well, the research center is like the Leiden University Center for the Arts and Society, but I was mainly part of the Dutch Studies program. Because the thing with my research is that it fits media studies, memory studies, post-colonial studies, Indonesian studies to an extent, Dutch studies. So in that sense, my profile is broad, and that is useful if you go on the job market. Because I could apply to like a Dutch studies position. It would be possible. Memory studies positions hardly ever exist. I was very lucky with this one. But media studies, of course, Indonesian studies to a certain extent, but I don't consider myself to be an Indonesianist per se. But theoretically, you could do it. But what I did actively do is try to sort of broaden my CV, but also the insights that you gain when you're actually traveling. So if you do your BA, MA, PhD at one particular university, then you're trained very well, I would say, but also within that university. So that's why I try to also go abroad, go to other universities, etc. But it's not that I'm actively seeking to get away from Amsterdam in that sense, because I'm happy there. But that's not entirely true. I do actually actively also try to get away because I apply for external grants. And actually, there's a slide that's not here that's after this. Actually, after Loughborough, I will head to Los Angeles because I applied for another grant and got that. So for the next 2 years, actually, will be in Los Angeles at another department because it's comparative literature. So in that sense. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, okay, so my question was basically on the fact that you said the overlaps, right? So from postdoc
Yeah.
straight to assistant professorship.
Yeah.
So is that like a normal thing for anyone that does a postdoc in
That's a very good question.
That's one.
Yeah.
And the second is, again, speaking about the overlap, like how supportive were your department, your supervisors? Because I mean, it's not a natural trajectory.
No.
So yeah, for you to go together.
I think these are very good questions. First of all, I don't know what is like a regular trajectory anymore in academia, but I would say what is common for sure is to finalize your PhD and then start as a lecturer, so do the teaching, and then from that position either apply for a postdoc or assistant professorship. That I would say, and in a way I did that also, but because it's a bit vague because I had this overlap. And in terms of support, my supervisors were very supportive, but they were also, it's not that they're not strict, because actually, that's also a good point, sometimes things come too early. So there was an assistant professorship that I actually wanted to apply to, but it was far too ambitious. It was a year, something like a year before I finalized the PhD. And then my supervisors were also like, don't do this now because it's way too early. You won't get it pretty much because it's way too early. You focus first on the PhD, finalize that, and then look further. And they were right. I mean, I wouldn't have stood a chance if I had applied for that. But in terms of their support for like the external grants, etc., they did say a few times that I should stop with, for instance, going to conferences and should focus on writing. So it's not that they weren't strict, but they were supportive in the sense that they would let me sort of carve out my space in academia. And this is also highly dependent on what kind of supervisors you have, which is difficult to know beforehand, especially if you come, I think, from abroad. But here it helps also to ask a lot of questions, which I come to also in a second.
You've covered one element, but I think it's possibly related.
Yeah, this is good. Yeah, this is also a good question. So the question is for recruitment requirements. How many publications are generally required? Most doctoral students in the UK are not required to publish. So in order to get a job, do we have to do a postdoc? And then actually to come back also to the question, this is difficult because there's not a good answer to this. My experience is that to actually get a PhD position, you might already have needed to publish. This sounds stupid, but it is true. So I had published before I got the PhD position, before I got the external grant. If you want to become an assistant professor in the Netherlands, you for sure need to have published. I don't know how much, but you have to, but maybe depends a bit, but if you have like 2 journal articles, could be for sure that you could have, that is enough. But it depends on a lot of factors. I think it's also quite common, it used to be quite common to actually become an assistant professor far later on in your career because there weren't as many positions. So then it was more common, I would say, that maybe you would already have a book, even. I don't have a book, as that was what I was talking about in the previous seminar, I'm working on it, but I have other things. So it's you can't really say, oh, you necessarily need 2 journal articles and that's it, because you might have connections with societal organizations that is of value. You might be a artist, for instance, and that's something that the department wants. You might be, in my case, I would say, I mean, I don't know because they don't tell you why you get the job, but in my case, I would say what for sure helped is because I got a lot of external grants. That is always a good thing because what that is you come to the university and say, look, I have some money, and then they don't have to pay you because you sort of pay yourself. And that's always a good thing. So that in my case, 100% helped, but I had a few publications already, not a book, so it's difficult to sort of say what, but for sure, in the Netherlands, it is common to already have published when you apply for both actually a postdoctoral position and an assistant professorship. That's why I say that the most common route is to first do the teaching thing, but that's actually just an excuse to pay your bills and then actually in sort of your free time do the research. I mean, this is horrible, but this is what it is pretty much. Yeah.
My question is, do you think it's very necessary to getting your teaching experience during your PhD? Because you mentioned you already have the teaching experience after your master, right? So when you apply for the job after you graduated for PhD, do you think it's very necessary? You have to...
Also a very good question. I'm under the impression that yes, you need to have some teaching experience, ideally during the PhD, because it's going to be harder afterwards in terms of the things you need to do, but you don't need to do a lot. So it's pretty much sort of I did a lot of teaching. Actually, I did so much teaching that also my supervisor, I think at one point said, like, you don't necessarily need to do this in terms of like a CV kind of sense. It's just a box that you need to tick. But I enjoyed it and it pays money, of course. So, I mean, you also have like practical issues if you need to pay the bills, and that's also a good reason to do it. So this also depends on your personal situation. But I would say, yes, do some teaching during the PhD if you have the chance to do it, but don't overdo it. And there's also a very specific period in which it is best to do it. I would say the first year, no, last year, no, ideally. Reason is first year, you really need to set up, you should figure out what the hell you're doing for the coming 4 years. And the last year is pure panic of trying to finalize the PhD. So in the first year, last year, I would not do it. Ideally, if you have the chance. Because this is, the things that I said is pretty much ideally. I did, I think, first and last. So, but it was also, this is also another reason, because in the Netherlands, you need to have a BKO, which is a university teaching quality certificate, something like that. That is what you need to have at one point. And also it's quite an investment. And I did that in my, this is not interesting, but I did it in my first year, I think, of my PhD or second year, because you need to have some teaching experience before that. Otherwise you can't get it. And I'm very happy that I did it, but a lot of people get that BKO afterwards. But that, is this the same question?
Yeah.
Okay. More questions? Because otherwise I'll go on to the next slide. Next slide is this. What are the elements that work for me? 1, hard work. This is the thing that you can do, right? This is where you have your own input. And what does that look like? So in my case, the question again, like this is also related to this previous question, publish or perish, right? It's true to a certain extent. I can't say that it isn't. Publications are still very important, but I would say that output is important. So they ask for output. And this depends also. So in my case, for instance, the topic, I'll come back to that later, that I was researching as a PhD was interesting for the public in the Netherlands at a particular time, which allowed me to do a lot of things that are not considered to be traditional academic output or weren't. So for instance, public lectures. I did I was like a moderator of a horror film festival that did Indonesian films, partly about the Indonesian, about the colonial part. It was great also. Podcast, did I say podcast? Podcast a few, things like that. So there are different forms of output that are also increasingly worth something. Again, depending on where you apply. So in the Netherlands, for sure, I would say, if I think about my own department, that would be something that would be valued. But I would also wouldn't be surprised if there are academic environments where that is not as valued as at other places. So again, this changes also depending on where you want to go. For me, I had a lot of teaching experience. I did a lot of lectures, and as I said, there were public lectures, guest lectures, and colleagues' classes, conferences, and then what worked for me was external funding. Again, this is not something that is the same for everybody, but this I feel is sort of where the things are that helped in my specific career. And I really did a mix of academic and non-academic. And this also, if you go, I'll go back 1 second. When I applied to this particular grant, they also really wanted a scholar who was societally engaged. Not all grants are, but again, and this is also if you let in the UK, where you have like a AHRC, Lever, and British Academy, I think they have different things that they ask for. And so your research project or your CV or your profile might not fit every external funder. This one was one that fit with mine because I could show them that during my PhD I actually was very engaged also with public events, etc. So that was something that worked for them as well. So that's one point. Secondly, network. They always say you need to network, you need to network. This does not mean that you need to talk to like the highest professor that there is in your field. That's not what networking is per se. It might be useful, might also be totally random. They also say that the people that are now around you, so the other PhDs, they're quite important because this is the future of academia. Also true. It's probably somewhere in the middle. You need to do both, whatever. But what does that network offer you and how do you get it? For me, what networking is, well, as I said, I was offered the job because I already worked. If you apply for more like structural, like for instance, an assistant professorship, no one will give you an assistant professorship. That's not what it, these are like small teaching contracts, but it helps, obviously. Publications, for instance, if someone is creating an editor's volume and asks you to submit a chapter, or someone is has a special issue and asks you to submit a article, etc. So in that sense, the network can help to get publications, but networking is also very much advice, I would say. Yeah, again, going to conferences if you have the money to do that, because that's always the thing. And then this is so funny also. I think I was talking to Connor about this, but LinkedIn, Twitter, things like that, social media. It does help to be seen. This all is sort of to the people. For instance, if someone in Frankfurt is thinking, okay, I'm going to write a book about memory studies and post-colonialism. Oh, there's this guy in Amsterdam who's working on Indonesia and the post-colonial situation there. I might ask him. So that's sort of positioning yourself there. But specifically with LinkedIn and Twitter, I found, especially Twitter, now it's dying, but in the beginning, this was super useful for making connections. I'm actually, I said in the last seminar, I'm actually trying to work on a second smaller book, which I pretty much connected with the publisher of the press through Twitter and things like that. So there is it's easier to sort of do that there. There might be like Blue Sky might now be the thing. I'm not on there yet. But there are ways to sort of, let's say, create a network, but also it's about advice there. So if you're interested in, I don't know, applying for a job at Leiden University, then it might be useful if there's someone that you know that you can ask, like, how's the situation there? How does that work? Do you think that my CV might fit there, etc., etc. So it's always good to know people, I would say. And this is for sure connected to the hard work. Because how do you get the network? It's through hard work also. And being nice. And to go to balls, as we say in the Netherlands, which means the drinks. So afterwards we have drinks, so you need to stick around because that's the most important thing. Yes.
Just on the previous slide.
This one.
Work.
Yeah.
You mentioned something about, at the time when you were doing your PhD, you were working on something that was very popular, like what people wanted to research on. So how do you actually, because as researchers, I think sometimes we struggle with such, hot topics.
Yes, yeah.
How do you kind of find your way, like your own pathway? You know,
Super good questions, again, and very difficult to answer, I would say.
yeah.
I think sometimes well, first of all, if your path is whatever interests you and is whatever you find the most exciting to write about, then you need pure luck to have that sort of that it becomes topical within society, for instance. But otherwise, you can see that there are sort of things happening in society that that are changing. So in my particular situation, when I applied for the PhD grant, it was a time in which the Netherlands, you could sort of feel and see in the public domain, if you will, like in the public debate also, that people were looking at how should we in the Netherlands look at our colonial past. And then my perspective there was, okay, so in the Netherlands, we're very much focused on the Netherlands, but how does Indonesia look at that particular past and how is that useful for the Netherlands? So in a way, you could, if you think about a new project, you can try to see what is sort of, what is a hot topic now, in a way. For instance, but it depends on what your background is. But obviously, you could do, well, there was a book presentation recently here by the Communication Media Studies Department about illiberal democracies. And you have people like Trump who come up. So that's going to be a topical thing for a couple of years. Artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, this kind of thing. But if that is not within your research profile, I wouldn't force that into it. So for me, it wouldn't make sense to do artificial intelligence unless I can connect it in a way to post-colonialism, history, Indonesia, which you can actually, but I wouldn't force it in that sense. The thing is that you probably have a research profile that you work with. Maybe you can find something within that to sort of go towards these hot topics, if you will. But I don't think that's necessarily, that can also be very superficial, because in the end, you also need to have a good academic research question, and that goes often beyond the topic that you're writing on. So whether or not the topicality of my previous seminar remains, the book should answer a question that is useful for academia, also for the future, etc. I don't know if that answers your question. Also need to go to the next one. Is doing research assistant helpful, TA and RA? Which one is more valuable for looking for a job? With TAs, I assume teaching assistant or research assistant. Depends on where you do this. And yes, I would say it's helpful in any case. As far as I know, if you are in the US and you are a TA, that means that you're a PhD and that you're helping with teaching. That's useful because I think it also gives you some money at least. It is experience for sure, but it's a different kind of experience to an actual teaching job in the Netherlands, for instance. But it depends also on what you mean with useful. Is it useful for paying your bills? Is it useful for connections? Is it useful for understanding whether you love or hate teaching in itself, for instance? Because you could really hate teaching, of course. And then academia might also not be free. And then a research assistant is the same. Maybe that's quite nice because you understand, okay, I do love doing research, etc. But it depends a bit on what is valuable. For finding a job, yeah, it depends also on the job, I think. But in general, I would say yes. I think yes. But okay, I'll go further because we don't have a lot of time. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh.
just a quick
Yeah,
question.
go ahead.
Before you became an assistant professor and while you are preparing for job application.
Yeah.
How do you see the grades of the publication? Like sometimes book chapters may not be as good as like the journal article, and in that period, what did you do?
I think that's very true, but it's also very difficult to understand. So there are journals that are considered to be more highly valued than others. But I wouldn't say that the research that's published there is necessarily better. But the thing is that it depends, and I can give a good answer to this because it depends on who the committee is that's across you. Because I know for sure that there are people in academia who value, for instance, publications in, okay, no, let's say Eurocentrism. Let's say that a lot of American and European journals are considered to do better than non-European or non-American. So in my case, for instance, if I would publish in an Indonesian journal, it would make a lot of sense for my research and would fit there, but I don't think it would be valued as high as I would, for instance, publish in memory studies. So and I can't say whether some things are better or not. If the research in one journal is better than the other, that for sure, I mean, I'm pretty sure that's not the case necessarily, but I would also say that there are people that would value some journals over others. And that is something that you might need to take into consideration. Book chapters, same. Some people say that journal articles are worth more than book chapters, but book chapters can offer you also a lot in terms of, again, as I said, like networking, the particular topic that you're writing about, the question that you can ask in the book chapter, etc. But it's a difficult question that there's no real concrete answer to, except for the fact that yes, there is a difference in how people value these things. And you need to, because you can, if you like, you only have time for one thing to write, right? So like it's a journal article or a book chapter, etc. So you need to figure out for yourself what works best, I would say. Let me go through only 3 slides, I think. This is an important one. No, this is it. Luck. This is it. We talked about this already. What is luck in this case? Well, one thing is, so hard work, that's something that you can do very much. You can do your best there. And then there's a factor in academia that is out of your hands to a large extent, which is this part, I would say. So one thing is timing of jobs. If I finished my postdoc and the job would not have been there, the job that I have now, then I would not have perhaps an assistant professor job, because I couldn't apply to that. Because I think in the year before and the year after, there were assistant professors jobs that did not fit my particular research profile. Because as I said, like this is extended cinema, film heritage and memory. I think we had one with, this wasn't it, but let's say you had one with queer cinema. I could not apply to that because that would not fit my research profile. If I had not applied to that, then I would be probably a lecturer again. So that is the timing. This is out of your hands. You don't really know what kind of jobs will be there when you finish your PhD. So that's one thing. The second thing is, now I'll start with the third thing. This is already what I said. So this topicality, this is also luck to a certain extent, whether or not the things that you're writing about are in the news or part of current events. That helps to a certain extent, because this also helps shape what kind of jobs they are formulating, I would say. And this is the most difficult one, and the most important one is that your fit. How do you fit a particular job or a particular department, etc.? And what that means is, what is the committee looking for? What kind of candidate do they want? Do they want someone with, and if you, for instance, have assistant professor of cinema, then they might think, you know what, we actually want someone who is an expert in Nigerian cinema. But they don't know beforehand that there would be someone who is specialized in Nigerian cinema, so they have a broad search. But the thing is, how do you fit what they need? And how do you know what they need? You won't know. You have absolutely no clue what the fit means. So this is also a slide that you can pretty much throw into the bin, because you can't do anything with this. This is not up to you whether or not there are jobs when you finalize your PhD, or whether or not you fit. I mean, to a certain extent, you can look at, obviously there's a job opening, you can see, okay, my research profile fits to a certain extent, but it doesn't necessarily mean, or for 100% sure, you don't know what the other side, so the committee in the department actually wants for that particular job. But then again, it also is, they might have an idea of what they want, but if you're such a good candidate, they might still also hire you. So in that sense, it's a difficult thing, but it's for sure a factor that is important. One thing that's also the case is that this does not say anything about how good of a scholar you are, right? So this might also be a year in which the jobs do not align with your research, or the fit does not align with your research. So that doesn't mean that if you're unsuccessful, for instance, for a few job applications, doesn't mean that it has to do with your particular CV, and for sure not that you're like a bad researcher, etc. It could also be bad luck to a certain extent. Okay, 2 things. One, super important, support. This you can do to a certain extent again. So this is, I had great supervisors, really. And that is in a way also luck to a certain extent, although I knew them as lecturers in my department. Colleagues, these can be colleagues from your particular department, but also I'm involved in a few journals. These can also be considered colleagues who can be quite supportive. Obviously, friends. This doesn't mean that they know what you're writing about. That doesn't matter. This might also be that they just are there for you to actually not think about your research. Family, same. And in my case, my wife has been a huge support, because otherwise I would have not been able to all the things that I've been doing here. But in this case, it is important to find some sort of support, and you can find it in a lot of places. And I think this also has to do with, especially the friends and family part, but also that you need to maybe not dedicate 100% of your time to the job, because it is a job, and it's very, very important to also do things that you like that are not related to the job, I would say. And their friends, for instance, are very useful, or family. Because a lot of people, I think, they call academia something like top sport, like in that they make the metaphor of that academia is like you can only make it if you're like the best of the best of the best in terms of like the athletes are the best of the best. But academia isn't really a meritocracy. It's not that if you are the best, whatever that may mean, that you also get a job, because there are many more factors. One factor is that you need to be nice, I would say. That helps. What was my point with this? I don't know what my point with this actually. Sorry, this also happens a lot. What was my point? I don't know. I think the combination of hard work and support, I think that's a good thing, and that is in your hands. Luck is a little bit more difficult, was the last point. Oh yeah, I think this is also important. Motivation. And with this is, that was what I wanted to say. The other thing is that some people say you can only make it in academia if you put like 100% of your time into it. Oh, you didn't publish because you didn't work in the weekends, etc. Now, this might be contradictory to what I said in the beginning, because okay, if you have a lecturer position, you pretty much no other option. But for me personally, what was quite important was this: one, do I enjoy what I'm doing? Two, am I so curious to find answers to the question, especially during your PhD in the last year, you just want to get over with it, but that's just how it works. And then the third is, do you want to invest the time that you're investing in it? So I invest a lot of time, but it's because I enjoy it still. Not because I think it's like, it doesn't feel like I'm doing overtime in a way. So I think this has to do with it. But can you be a good scholar if you purely see academia as work and nothing else? Then yes, also. But for me, this helps. I like doing what I do. Okay, we have 5 more minutes. That's great, because if there are any questions, I can answer them. And otherwise, you can also contact me here and again look at the media studies department. We have nicer buildings, but this is a nice building as well. Yeah.
I'm looking for jobs, and like in a lot of like British job posts, there's like a essential requirement. You need to have a like ability to associate with different stakeholders, like outside academia.
Yeah.
And I wonder your experience.
Yeah.
In your company.
I can't remember if it was in my job opening, but it was for sure something that I did mention in my motivation letter. That I did have that. And the thing is, again, what I said is that I actually had a lot of experience with doing events with non-academic organizations or events like film festivals. I did. There's an Indie Dutch Memorial Center in the Netherlands that I worked with. All kinds of things. So I think that helps for sure. I mean, especially if they ask for it, then it's useful to try to find something there. But I think one thing also is, I don't know if I think there's nothing that I've said that is not allowed to be published online. But I think one of the things is also that what you need to understand is that these job openings are very specific, also because so many people apply to it. And if you think, well, I fit this pretty well, but maybe not 100%, then it might still be useful to apply to it. So for instance, if you fit really well, but your teaching experience isn't as great as they ask you to, then it might still be worth it to apply. On the other hand, this also is sort of a calculation of your time investment, because I know also, for instance, if you have, let's say you have an Ivy League position in the US, then so many people apply to it that they pretty much get the candidate that they've written on paper, I would say. But even also, I mean, for us also, there are so many people that apply to positions. It's pretty abnormal, I would say. But you need to sort of explain why you do fit the profile that they are asking. Like, how do you fit the job opening, and why would you be a good person to be considered, or actually the best person to have at that particular department? And that I think you can do even without ticking all the boxes, although it might be good to sort of see how your CV fits into that actually. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Any more? Some of you need to leave. Yeah, go ahead. If not, I'll be around still also in the next room for a few more minutes. But one more. Yeah. Are there any recommended sources for finding academic jobs in Europe? Yes. Netherlands is academic transfer. The rest I don't know, because that's where I ended, because I got the job. But I'm sure there are UK websites. I think like Times Higher Education, but that might be the US. And there's another one that I can't remember. But I'm pretty sure I would be sure that you can Google like websites with academic jobs. But for the Netherlands, it's called academic transfer. There they post everything. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you everybody online. Everyone who's online.
Thank you for listening to the podcast of Loughborough University's Institute of Advanced Studies. A quick reminder about how to stay connected. You can find us on Blue Sky, LinkedIn and Instagram, and you can also watch the presentations on YouTube. The podcast is available on all the major platforms. Please download, share, and most importantly, subscribe. See you next time.